Evening, everyone. We're going to do that again because we want to make sure that we are here, we're present to receive the conversation that has been so diligently prepared. So good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Nisha Bochwe. I serve as the Dean of the Humphrey School, and it is truly my honor to welcome you and all of our panelists here this afternoon. Thank you for being here today. At the Humphrey School, we exist to examine public policy where it meets lived experience. The topics we're engaging today about law enforcement, human rights, accountability, and the impacts on community are not at all abstract. They are shaping how we experience safety, belonging, and trust in institutions right now. This school was built for moments like this, not because we expect easy answers, but because we believe that rigorous, informed, and respectful dialogue is essential to public leadership, especially in times of uncertainty and tension, and that public leadership is not performed by only people with titles, it's performed by all of you. I also want to acknowledge this broader context many of us are carrying into this room. Over the past weeks, our students, faculty, staff, and our full community have been navigating stress, concern, and a lot of uncertainty, often while continuing to show up for one another with patience and generosity. As a school, we've been responding by prioritizing care and flexibility, clear communication, while staying rooted in our academic mission. So today's conversation is part of that very response. I'm deeply grateful to our partners across the university who helped make this event possible, and to the faculty and staff who worked and thoughtfully brought us together here tonight. I also want to thank our speakers for their willingness to engage in a conversation that is both timely and complex, and so very, very important. Conversations like this matter not because they resolve everything, or maybe not even one thing right now, but because they sharpen our understanding of the choices that are before us. They help future public servants think more clearly about power, about responsibility, and the consequences of policy decisions, and they affirm the role of public institutions like this one here at the Humphrey School. So thank you again for being here, for engaging with care, and for helping us uphold these values that define the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, of inquiry, dialogue, and courage. And so with that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Professor Eric Schwartz to begin today's conversation. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean Bochwe. We are deeply grateful for your support. I'm thrilled by the response to this event. As of this morning, nearly 500 people had registered to join us, both in person and online, from Minnesota and well beyond our state. And that turnout, of course, speaks to the urgency and the significance of the issues we're here to confront. Accountability. Accountability is a concept that certainly includes the indispensable work of citizens, activists, attorneys, advocates, those who are right next to me, defending the rights and dignity of those subjected to abuse. But it goes further. Accountability also means attributing responsibility to perpetrators of abuse, including our federal government, senior federal law enforcement officials and individual officers, and pursuing not only redress, but justice for victims. That concept could not be more vital today than, in Minnesota, probably also in Mississippi. We are witnessing a militarized federal presence, along with a president and a federal government that have shown an unwillingness to take seriously credible reports of unlawful killings, of arbitrary arrests and detention, of mistreatment of detainees and of demonstrators. And courts, often the last recourse for aggrieved individuals and communities, have too frequently been disregarded. As a faculty member here, I see the human consequences of this every day. A student living in fear after encountering unidentified individuals seeking out an immigrant neighbor in the student's apartment building. Another student enduring heartbreak and suffering as a loved one is detained through no fault of their own, tearing a family apart. And a pervasive anxiety that now shapes our learning and civic environment. That is our reality. And yet, we are not without hope. Far from it. The speakers here today are living evidence of the spirit of humanity in our community and the real possibility of a more just future. We have a large panel, a very large panel, because the challenges before us are so many and so varied. I have asked each panelist, let us pray, to speak for no more than 4 minutes, so we can reserve time for discussion. And while they may touch on themes that I'm about to outline, I've encouraged them to address whatever they believe to be most important. We will hear today, in order of presentation, from Carolina Ortiz, Deputy Executive Director of COPAL, and Dr. Abdi Salam Adam, Principal of the East African Magnet School, who will speak about what communities are experiencing here. Dr. Yael Shaker of Refugees International will address the federal government's new Paris program. Sarah Brennis, who heads the Binger Center, and Teresa Dykostjak, pro bono director of the Advocates, will discuss their work in defending immigrant rights. Nicole Wittersheim of Human Rights Watch will talk about what her fact-finding is beginning to reveal. Amelia Schindelar of the university's Human Rights Initiative will speak about community-based support efforts. And Professor Fionnuala Ní Oláin, Commissioner in the UN Commission of Inquiry in Syria, on Syria, will place these issues in an international accountability framework, and as I told the panelists, will be our cleanup hitter. I will take the liberty of referring to each speaker by their first name. So with that, Carolina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Test, test, test. Can everybody hear me? All right. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. I know it's later in the day, but appreciate you being here and willing to listen. My name is Carolina. I'm the Associate Director with COPAL, and we started this work back in 2018. In 2024, once we knew what was coming and we had an idea, we said, okay, we have to figure out who are our partners, how we come together, because no one organization is going to be able to take on the possibility of worst case scenario. And it was a small group of us that came together after 2024, after we saw a plan for the project 2026. We said, okay, we needed plan A, B, and C with our partners. Now we need plans A through Z, right? Because we knew that it was going to be a lot more challenging and a lot more complexity coming with that. Initially, we put a call out to our partners. We had over 40 partners join that first conversation. to bring to right now, we have 110 different partners organizations that have come together to say, yep, this is going to take all of us. How do we put our talents, our skills on the table in order to address what's happening? That is what is now called the Immigrant Defense Network. I'm sure many of you have maybe seen that on news or social media, where it's really been known for community members calling our helpline when they see ICE presence, but also now, we're getting to a point where people are saying, I had saved up money, I'm running out, I need support with rent, I need support with food. We've seen more and more that people are calling in also for medical recommendations because people are not able to get their medications, they're afraid of going out. We have also gotten an increase of people that need support for their pets. For those that were left behind as families were being deported, and also for those that are still here, but they're not able to go out and get their vaccines or get taken care of in a normal way. On a day-to-day basis, we have been receiving at least 400 calls each day. And that has been from everything that I mentioned to things that we never thought that we would be handling through our helpline, and we are now. It's been a huge intake of cases, and we've been working with lawyers, we've been working with different partners, but even lawyers that have 20 to 30 years of experience are saying, everything I know, everything I thought I knew is going out the window because we all have so many more questions that we do have answers, and it's really trying to understand how we take this information and how we can better support our communities right now. It has been incredibly challenging, and many of the cases, I've taken phone calls myself, I've been on the ground with my team. Many of us were there when we got the call about Renee Good. We were on the spot. We were able to witness not just what we saw on the news, but also the multiple acts of violence happening across the entire area. I always think about it, and it's unfortunate that as the killing of Renee happened, we had so many other situations from the team, from other people, where the ICE agents were literally pointing their arms at them directly. And the way that they were talking to our community, so the way that they were talking to us, it was just, we knew that it was going to be something that was going to be an extra challenge for us. Not only has it been incredibly challenging for us to try and attempt to be with community, but we ourselves within the team have also been personally targeted. I've had agents show up to my home, 5, 6 vehicles, armed men, knocking on my door, looking through my mailbox, leaving me notes, waiting for me as I'm getting out of my home. It got to the point that I had to get out of my house and get my family into a safe place because I no longer felt that my home was safe. It got to the point where I needed to make sure that the team and I had a plan in case the agents that were waiting outside of our workplace, if they took us, what the action plan was. And I think, I'm sure the rest of the panel will talk about this, but it's really been us trying to, as prepared as we were, as ready as our partners were, we're dealing with so many things that even people with so much experience in so many years, we're trying to figure it out. I love that you said that there's also hope, because I agree that between all this chaos, there is a lot of hope. We're organizing, and as much fear as we have, as shaky as my voice is, as shaky as my legs are, we know that we have to keep showing up. We will get through this, and once we do get through this, the work that is happening right now of documenting, of conversations, of testimony, we need all of that, because we will be able to do something about this. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So I'll pause there. I know we have 4 minutes, so I'll pause there. But again, thank you all.
I'm going to, I will announce each speaker again. Abdi Salam is not only a principal here, but also a leader in our Somali American community. So it's a real pleasure and honor to have you here, sir.
Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to be here this evening to share with you some information about the Somali community and its experience. So just to put it in context, I will go back a little bit about Somali. Who are the Somali people, and how did they end up here? I know most of you are college and kind of know that history, but just quickly. So the Somali people, the people are Somali, the language is Somali, and they inhabit the Horn of Africa, among Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Kenya. So ethnically Somali, and estimated population is about, it varies, but could be up to 20 million Somalis in the Horn of Africa region. And historically, nomadic background, people fierce, a lot of contact with civilizations as early as the Egyptians, the Greek, the Romans, and all of that because of the strategic location with India as well. And so it's kind of sense of pride and oral, language, and so on was kind of the characteristics of the people of Somalia. And then 1960, the colonialism kind of divided the people, put the borders, some were in Ethiopia and Kenya, all of that. And eventually, in 1960, the British Somaliland and Italian united to form the Somali Republic. It was a democratic country for the first 9 years. Somalis proudly speak of that time, freedom of the press, freedom of politics and all of that. And the military coup took over in 1969, ruled for 21 years. It was a dictatorship, it was Soviet-style, communist system, until everything fell apart in 1991. So the Civil War, and people had to flee and be in Kenya. And that's where the United States started sponsoring refugees to come to the US. And initially they settled in different states, and people always ask, why Minnesota? And it seems when the initial refugees arrived in the different states, it seems the one who came to Minnesota liked, the reception that they had in terms of the settlement, the accommodations in the school system, hiring bilingual staff, learning about the community. I remember myself, I came to Washington, D.C. in 1991, lived in the D.C. area and came to Minnesota in 1996, and this has been home. I've lived in Somalia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia. This is home. I love it here. It has made me who I am. So there's a sense, deep sense of gratitude and, appreciation for the people of Minnesota. And I was just talking to my colleagues from the advocates. 1996, I think it was, maybe 99, I think a conference was held at Roosevelt High School. This Somali community coming here, everybody's asking, wants to know more about them. Maybe 1,200 people showed up that day. Just who are they and how to accommodate and how to work with this community. So with that, there is that growth of the community, and of course, being oral society, people in the refugee camps started hearing about Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities, and that's just that word of mouth spread, and that's how we have the largest Somali community in the United States. And so with that sense of resettlement, now going to second generation, we're very appreciative. So the question now is, can you help us tell the president to stop mentioning Somali every moment? So it's just kind of heavy, the weight of the President of the United States, the federal government, the department, everyone just kind of attacking the community is really heavy. So since the surge here started, or the occupation started, Cedar-Riverside was kind of the starting point right here. I think second day, I think more than many agents were in Cedar-Riverside right here. And from there to St. Cloud, to McKnight in St. Paul, wherever the Somali side, there has been a lot of focus on that. And as a principal in a school, one thing that's amazing that you'll be surprised to hear tonight is that families are showing up at the school, students are showing up, attendance has been as much as it has been in other years. That defies logic, right? But it tells you the resistance of this community that we have gone through a lot. We've seen, there was forced conscription in Somalia itself. At the refugee camps, police used to chase the Somalis. So a lot of people, they're son of faith. We've seen something worse. We're going to make it. We are here to stay. We love the people of Minnesota. Everybody's stepping up. So there's that sense of resilience and survival, and better days will come. And so there's a lot of optimism in the community in spite of all that we are seeing. So with all the focus, I think the biggest danger is just the xenophobic and the hatred specifically of targeting the Somali community in addition to all the layers. That's my biggest fear. So with your support and everybody, people of Minnesota standing up, we shall overcome, and I think better days will come soon. Thank you.
I thought it particularly appropriate to turn now to Dr. Yael Shaker, my former colleague, who is going to talk about Operation Paris, which is having a significant impact on the Somali community.
Thanks. I don't know if I can cover that much ground as you did in 4 minutes, but that was fantastic. So in sort of this terrible time of false narratives about immigrants and refugees and a flooding of the zone with illegal enforcement practices, I'm just going to tell you a story of somebody who was swept up in this operation, a 25-year-old Khaja Musay Muhammad, a Somali single mom and a young son who was resettled in St. Cloud in 2024 from a refugee camp in Ethiopia, along with her mom and her disabled stepdad and some other siblings. On the way to work on January 10th, she was pulled over by an undercover ICE agents on the way to work, taken to Fort Snelling, then flown to Texas, where she was threatened with deportation, pressured to self-deport, and not given the interview, which was the reason she was supposedly detained, to re-interview her whether or not she was really eligible for refugee status. More than a week later, she was dumped on the streets and had to make her way back to Minnesota. This is all done under the guise of Operation Paris, which is something called, that's an acronym, Post-Admission Re-Verification and Integrity Strengthening, a policy the administration announced to re-vet all the refugees who came during the Biden administration, starting with those who had not yet adjusted to permanent residence status, which happens after 1 year of arrival. It's about 5,600 people in Minnesota. So this is completely inhumane and illegal because there is no authority under the law to detain and deport admitted, recognized refugees. It's unnecessary because all these refugees have already been thoroughly vetted and proven they are refugees and will not, done en masse in this way, effectively address any supposed fraud if it exists. And of course, it hurts Minnesota, which gains so much culturally and economically from its refugees who are here, as you've just heard. It's unprecedented historically, a departure from past practice, and a racist and complete disregard for human rights. It's also of a piece with the strategies and goals of this president and this administration. In 2015, candidate Trump ran on an anti-refugee platform, trying to break bipartisan support for refugee resettlement. He was already hurling slurs at Somalis back then, but second term, President Trump and this administration has been all about not just preventing the admission of refugees, but revoking the status from people who are already here. With Operation Paris, it's targeting people who spend years getting interviews and vetted and waiting for a chance to come to the United States, turning this first year in the US from a time of them able to rebuild their lives and economically integrate into a time of complete insecurity. It's of a piece of the stripping of people with TPS and parole and work permits of these statuses. This operation is of a piece of flooding the zone with enforcement against people of all different statuses and postures. It's arbitrary. There are no protocols. There's no process. It's chaos. It's uncontrolled. It instills fear in the community, paralyzing people. Even if refugee status is not revoked and green cards are accorded, the trauma is lasting after an experience of being sent to Texas that way. The move to rapidly deport refugees like Khaja is undoing the laws in practice, making humanitarian statuses a dead letter, even if the law remains. It's weaponizing the process. Refugees are being called for re-vetting interviews, and the process is being turned against them, trying to catch them. If you have this interview, it might not match something you said 10 years ago exactly, that's going to be used against you, that kind of thing. In response, what we're seeing on the HOPE side is amazing pushback by advocates, habeas corpus claims to get people out of detention, class action lawsuits to stop the policy whole cloth, help from supporters of refugees who travel all the way to Texas to bring them back. But the revetting is continuing. It's frightening and inconsistent notices are being left in mailboxes still. And the fear instilled in the community, as I said, will have lasting impact. People are losing their jobs because they're either detained or afraid to leave the house. And they're back in that trauma that they had of being stateless before they got here, right? Of having their status stripped away from them. So this reveals the need for us to really document everything to make sure this does not happen again, ever again, and to pave the way for structural and legal reform. For example, litigation may stop the detention and deportation, but we'd probably need legislative reform to make sure that the pro forma adjustment to green card status that exists for refugees is not warped into this like weaponized detention and deportation process. We can change that. That's something we can do. The Refugee Act, which delineated that process of how refugees are assessed abroad, resettled in the United States, adjust to permanent status after they get there, is the only law on the books in the United States that incorporated the actual language of a human rights treaty into domestic law. We need not only to stop the backsliding and the undermining of this law, but actually make sure that more of American immigration law and policy is compliant with human rights norms, like the refugee was, or used to be. Refugee law can and should be a wedge and an inspiration to get us there. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Yael. Having worked with Yael, I can say that the fact that she went 20 seconds over is quite an accomplishment. So now we're going to move to Sarah, and we're moving from these individual stories really to what litigators and what folks are doing on the ground, and also sort of what's actually happening. How many people here know that lawyers have filed hundreds of habeas actions, which is a demand that the government justify detention? Can you imagine the amount of time, energy, and effort that takes? So please, Sarah Brennis.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a little step back, both in history. Teresa and I are tag teaming on the legal response, so I'm going to provide a little more of the context, and then she'll talk about some of the current actions. Just to introduce the center, we are part of the University of Minnesota, the Binger Center for New Americans. We're housed in the law school. And our mission is to protect and advance the rights of non-citizens in the United States through advocacy, litigation, and community education. We work in collaboration with our clients, with partners, faculty, and students, and use the institution of law and higher education to help foster an inclusive community that treats everyone, including non-citizens, with dignity and agency. We are part of our law clinic, so a lot of our work focuses on representing individual clients through law students who are certified attorneys, or certified law students, student attorneys, and work in partnership. We were founded in partnership with nonprofits like the Advocates for Human Rights and other legal service providers in the very robust pro bono law firm community that we have here in Minnesota. And Teresa will talk about just how they are mobilizing in this moment. And we also work with our students in the clinics to represent individuals who are held in immigration detention, might be seeking humanitarian protection, and also preparing appeals and habeas claims in federal court. So just to give a little context into how we got to this moment, there is a much longer lecture on the history of U.S. immigration and policies as really a dichotomy of invitation and exploitation, and increasingly detention and deportation. Immigration laws have fallen under the Department of Treasury, Department of Labor, Department of Justice, and since 2003, the Department of Homeland Security. And with each iteration, immigration policy was handled with an increasingly air of criminalization, and as we've seen here in Minnesota and elsewhere, militarization. I'll leave it to colleagues like Yael, who are historians, and colleagues in the Immigration History Research Center to really provide that deeper context of the longer history. But what I'll say about this more recent history is we've seen a real failure of our Congress to pass laws that respond to today's mobility of international migrants, and plan for the future mobility and movement of people that humans have done as long as we've been on the earth in a way that does not equate border security with a fair and functioning immigration policy. There's approximately 304 million international migrants. Globally, the international migrant numbers equate the population of the 4th largest country in the world, and that likely won't change. So planning for that as a potential future is important to be proactive and not be reactive as a country. And here in the US, we've seen tensions grow at the local level as local governments respond to whatever federal policies are in place. We saw this in Texas when Governor Abbott took to putting militias at the southern border and busing migrants to blue states under the Biden administration. And we see it now as blue cities and states enforce separation ordinances to preserve law enforcement resources and leave immigration enforcement to federal agencies that are now more well-resourced than ever. The big beautiful bill that was signed in 2025 allocated a budget to ICE that surpassed those of all combined US state and local governments and comparable to annual defense spending in major nations. A budget that also outsized the Department of Justice, and Teresa will talk about the impacts that we're seeing in that in the courts as well. And what came next was, as we've seen over the past year, CBP and ICE flooding states that are blue and cities like Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles in the past few months here in Minnesota. And the hope that I think we have seen in initial response is how Minnesotans have stood up to care for their neighbors, the courage that people have to sustain themselves and rely on each other. I think there's been a new awareness of the fragility of civil rights and the need to protect those. And what I really hope, as Yale mentioned as well, as an emerging demand for more fair and sound immigration policies that do a better job of welcoming immigrants and really standing for what our country was designed to be as a place of welcoming. And I think everyone probably in this room has learned more from the media and the number of experts and colleagues that have been informing people about immigration laws and really seeing from helping individuals and not understanding why they are being detained and trying to navigate immigration laws has been complex. And as others have mentioned, those of us who've been practicing immigration laws for years, this is new territory, and there's really no reason for it to be as complex as it is. So the hope is that we have some reforms, and Teresa will talk a little more about the direct legal response. Oh.
Thank you. For those that don't know the Advocates for Human Rights, we are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. Our mission is to implement human rights standards, to promote civil society, and to reinforce the rule of law. I see some familiar faces here tonight, so I think we're well connected with the Humphrey Center. We were founded back in 1983. We both provide direct legal representation for people seeking asylum, who are victims of human trafficking, who are detained, and who are unaccompanied kids. We also conduct advocacy at a local, national, and international level on a variety of human rights issues. And actually, one of our earliest projects was the development of the Minnesota Protocol on the investigation of potentially unlawful deaths, which was adopted by the United Nations and is used around the world. But I'm here tonight to focus on the legal response, what we're seeing now. And what we're seeing is that, as Yael mentioned, people are being detained and they are very quickly being transferred from Minnesota out of the state. While they are at Whipple Building, they are being denied access to counsel, and they're being transferred to locations where there also is very limited access to counsel. Few of the people that are being arrested have criminal histories. Arrests are performative for social media. Arrests are based on racial profiling, and these are individuals who also have been attending and participating in ongoing immigration processes, and they may have entered through parole programs which were only revoked because of the administration taking them away or because of delays in the adjudication of their applications. So how are we responding? Well, we've heard mention of habeas petitions. And Sarah and I have been working a lot together recently because there has been a huge support in filing and protecting people's rights to not be unlawfully detained and filing habeas petitions in our district courts. Through the Binger Center and a collaboration of a variety of organizations, there is the Minnesota Habeas Project that is being developed, and that is providing access to individuals to receive legal representation with their habeas corpus proceedings, and also additional immigration support on top of that. In addition to the habeas project, which is in development, and the multiple habeas petitions that have already been filed, we at the Advocates for Human Rights had been partnering with a law firm in order to file petitions in response to Operation Paris for those unadjusted refugees. And we're the organizational plaintiff in the lawsuit that currently has a TRO in place to stop the detention of unadjusted refugees who are going in response to the call-in letters and participating in the process for these interviews. I mentioned earlier that that there is lack of access to counsel at Whipple, and so we also are a plaintiff in the lack of access to counsel litigation that was recently brought as well. So our hope, what brings me hope, is not only the collaboration with the Binger Center and other organizations and the law firms, it's the enormous response, the overwhelming response from our pro bono community, not just here in Minnesota, but from around the country. I'm overwhelmed with the number of emails of people reaching out, asking what they can do to help. And also what brings hope, while our courts are overwhelmed, the District of Minnesota is very overwhelmed with all of these habeas petitions, but they are calling our government to task. And they are highlighting the fact that the government is not complying with orders, and they are bringing the government in front of them to demand a response and to demand accountability for why they're not complying. So those are two big things that bring me hope in this moment. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. And I want to compliment the panelists. This will be the first panel in history of 8 that has gotten through all of the presentations within 45 minutes. So, no, but thank you. Very important. And so now we have Nicole Wittersheim from Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, and thank you, Eric, and everybody at the university who have both hosted myself and the Human Rights Watch research team, who's been here for over a week. And it's been a very welcoming and warm and allied relationship to be in while we've been here. Human Rights Watch, as you probably know, is an international nonprofit, independent, we take no government money organization that works in over 90 countries and has many programs across the United States. We have looked at and documented rights violations by the federal government in Los Angeles and Chicago most recently. And we also did a piece for your fallen neighbors, Renee Good and Alex Preddy recently, looking at all of the the images and the videos captured by brave citizens. And the primary purpose, you said, of the panel was also to talk about accountability, and an organization like ours tries to document directly with people who've experienced this violence, these violations, put it into a paper, come up with some recommendations, and make sure that we get it to all levels, state, local, federal, policymakers, courts, and we often are used, our work is often used in courts of law and in asylum adjudications and things like this, war crimes courts. Right now, what we've been hearing is, well, first off, let me just say, I have been so, I said today, talking to the former chief of police here, and I said, you know, this has been gas in my gas tank, sitting in Washington, trying to affect the situation one email at a time, that sitting here and getting out and talking to so many people who are just doing so many things and saying they're not gonna wait for Washington, they're not gonna wait for the government to save them, they're gonna save themselves. And so when I think about accountability in that context, I think that there is already communal accountability. You are already being accountable to yourself, your neighbor, and you're taking care of it. But you also have a major problem with state, local, and federal accountability And perhaps, as some Congress people have questioned, and we're going to hear about this, where the international community should be looking at what is happening here. And so accountability can come in different layers. In other work that I have done, and lots of the panelists have also had this experience, there have been truth and reconciliation processes that have been one way to seek accountability. There's a lot of lawyers involved in this, and as they should, but we know our rule of law structures are very fragile at this moment, and the law isn't working in our favor right now, or they're just choosing to ignore the law, which is really alarming. So gathering the narratives here, the oral histories, the facts, and waiting for that moment to put that all together in a safe and secure, in a way in which Minnesotans want that story told, want that history kept, and want that long-term accountability sought if the courts don't provide it for you in the interim. That's extremely important. A lot of people have done that in a lot of situations, as equally violent or more so. The other thing is compensation. We've met with not a lot. I'd love to stay here and keep doing this because they're so nice, and then they give us like free drinks and food. But we have met a lot with business owners who are, I don't need to tell you guys this, but I'm going to go back to DC and tell everybody about it, that they're half a mutual aid and half of a business, and they're sitting there telling us how much revenue they've lost. So they're still like giving, and it's not about what they're giving away, it's about their normal business. Who's keeping track of that? Who's keeping track of the lost revenue? Who's keeping track of the automobiles that ice crashed and broke windows and the cost to repair that? The cost of people trying to make their way back from Texas and the lost work days. We met a woman who had to find her own flight back from Texas, and she also had to use up all her sick leave and vacation so she didn't lose her job. And she literally was just going to work, as you know, and she was nabbed. So, I wanted to write down all of that and take it to Governor Walz and to Senator Klobuchar's office and say, can someone write a check for this one? But that collection of the compensation, that is also accountability. That is repair and compensation and reparations and redress. And you have to think about that in light of all the other things you guys are doing every day and every hour here. One of the things that Human Rights Watch is doing is we're focused a lot on the DHS change in legislation, operation, policy. I hate to say reform because that really, can it be reformed? We don't know yet. And I have lists here of 25, 28 different recommendations. I want to save those for the Q&A because I don't want anybody's eyes to glaze over. But one of the things, and I will end here, is that one piece of this is ensuring accountability for the abuses of the federal officers and end qualified immunity. Now, I'm not a lawyer. DC has more lawyers than they do maybe restaurants. I'm not quite sure. But if the law is not working for us and it's no longer defending our civil rights and our human rights and our lives, it's time to look at those laws. And so being strict in this federal immunity, it's not working right now. And there are pieces of legislation that some folks are pursuing at the federal level to take a good hard look at that, among other things.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay. Our penultimate speaker is Amelia Schindler from the Human Rights Initiative.
All right, thanks, Eric. I am staff here at the University of Minnesota, where I lead the Human Rights Initiative, which is an amalgamation of a number of different human rights projects. My research focus is on the well-being, security, and protection of human rights defenders and social justice activists. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I'm seeing in our community these days. I'm going to start by paraphrasing Charles Dickens' famous opening line, which I believe pretty accurately describes what is happening here in Minnesota. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. So here in Minnesota, we're seeing both the rapid restriction of civic space as well as the growth and blossoming of our communities. Civic space in the United States is closing at an ever more rapid pace, following the model of many authoritarian regimes. We are seeing increasing government restrictions, such as National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which redefines acts of advocacy and protest as domestic terrorism and political violence, bringing intense scrutiny and legal repercussions on the individuals and organizations that do this important work. We have seen this language also being used to talk about the extrajudicial killings of both Renee Good and Alex Peretti. In his response to Renee's death, the president immediately called her a domestic terrorist instead of the human rights defender that she was. We see daily attacks on freedom of speech and assembly, from the president calling a journalist piggy when he doesn't like the question she asked him, to nonviolent protesters being indiscriminately sprayed with chemical irritants. The tear gas that we are seeing and experiencing in our own communities is classified as a chemical weapon and prohibited in international warfare. Yet, at the same time, our community is coming together in a profound and beautiful way. And you've heard a little bit about this from all of our other panelists, but a little bit more. Tens of thousands of people have been trained as legal observers to document ICE actions. Thousands more are doing mutual aid, feeding, housing, and comforting each other. Others are working around the clock to track vehicles and agents to be able to dispatch legal observers to the correct places at the correct time to be able to do those vital documentation actions, which are going to be important for accountability. Small groups of individuals are waiting outside of the Whipple building around the clock to provide comfort and aid to detainees who are being put out on the street with nothing, often in sub-zero temperatures. As you heard from my fellow panelists, hundreds of lawyers are providing legal counsel and filing court documentation free of charge. Thousands of people are showing up to peacefully protest, joining in song and dance, all under the fear of being tear gassed, and while we live in this constant state of crisis. I'm going to take a few moments here to share two stories with all of you. One is a personal story, and one comes from a member of our community. My ex-husband is a naturalized citizen from an African country. My children, who are 14 and 10, are mixed race, and like so many others, are living in a constant state of fear. My ex has had a minimum of 3 encounters with immigration authorities in the last 6 months. In late 2025, agents went to his home, questioned him about his immigration status, and demanded to see his papers. Luckily, I had explained to him not to hand over anything and not to sign anything. In the last few weeks, he has been detained twice, once on the way to the store and once in the employee parking lot at his workplace. Each time, he has been taken into custody. He has been detained for hours and released late at night, again, with no resources, no ability to get home or to get what he needs. Once having to walk an hour and a half to get to a place where he knew someone he trusted to help him. My kids are afraid that their dad is going to be taken away from them. They are experiencing intense anxiety, which is manifesting in meltdowns, difficulty sleeping, lack of appetite, and trouble at school. The next story I would like to share is that of Estaquio, thank you, Anna. I knew I was going to mess that up. So this story was shared with us by Estaquio's wife, who says, he is a hardworking and honest man. He respects the laws and tries not to harm his neighbor. He has been living in the US for over 20 years. He's a husband and a father whose only crime is wanting a life with better opportunities for his family. Estaquio is a labor organizer with a local nonprofit, and on January 9th, he was detained by ICE agents on his way to work. They moved him from Minnesota to El Paso, Texas, and then to New Mexico. To this day, he does not appear in any of the immigration systems, and if they move him, it is not easy for his family to locate him again. His wife went on to share that he is only allowed 1 phone call every 5 days, and it only lasts 2 to 3 minutes. When he called his wife most recently, he chose to spend those precious few moments recounting the egregious human rights violations he is seeing and experiencing. She says, He tells me he can't generalize because there are also officers who do their job with dignity and respect, but there are officers who are using drugs while making arrests until they hand over the detainees. They also beat them and shoot them. One detainee was grabbed by an ICE agent who pointed a gun at the back of his neck and said, "In this country, you are worthless, and if you move, I'm going to shoot you." He then goes on to share a story of elder abuse about a gentleman over 70 years old who arrived with his arms covered in marks, and that when they handcuffed him, they cut his skin. He says that the man can barely walk and the excessive force used against him was unnecessary. She finishes by saying, "I believe we cannot stand idly by and wait for this to change. These are women and men who have contributed to this country with their work and effort. I cannot accept that someone comes and says that my husband is a criminal just for not having a document that says he has the right to be here, when I see that those who accuse him are the true criminals." I would like to close my remarks by reminding us all that immigration policy is about power and control, and it is community that is our place of belonging. We all belong here, and our community is proving that every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia, for that really gripping testimony. I want to say a word about our next speaker, Fionnuala Ní Oileán, who is appearing before us graphically and not in person. When I first reached out to Professor Ní Oileán, she explained to me that she was in Ireland and wouldn't be able to attend, but I didn't give up. I said, well, that's only a 7-hour difference, so you could be there and be asleep by 1. And she said, well, it's okay, I'll be in London, so it'll only be midnight. But we're really honored and fortunate, and I think you will, when you hear her, you will see why I made those efforts. Fionnuala is one of the most distinguished international human rights lawyers, not in Minnesota, but in the country and the world. And we are honored to have her bat cleanup for this group. So, Fionnuala, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here with you all this evening, and my deep regret is that I'm not with you in person as I dial in from a very late hour in London. I'm a professor at the law school and a faculty director at the Human Rights Centre. We're the oldest law school human rights centre in the United States, and we have consultative status at the UN, which I think has given us a really important perch over many years to bring Minnesota human rights to the world. And now I hope to be able to bring the world's human rights to Minnesota. Aside from my day job at Minnesota, as you know, I have other roles, including most recently as a commissioner on the Commission of Inquiry in Syria. And so I think my remarks focus on what we've learned from across the world about how we respond to practices of repression, violence, and coercion in democratic backsliding contexts, how we face systematic human rights violations, and how we maintain our commitment to the rule of law and the fundamental and inalienable rights of each person. I think what we've learned over many years is that the starting and end point is that victims and affected communities must be at the heart of how we do our work, how we use the law, and how we hold individuals and states accountable. This is true in Minnesota as we seek both national and international remedies for the violations we've observed in recent months. And that process has to be profoundly inclusive of rural and urban, of old and young, of gender diversities, of the multiplicities of cultures, language, faiths, and identity that make up this states. The bigger the tent we have, the better the justice. Our state, Minnesota, has regrettably lots of practice and learning, some of it very old from our native communities, for whom these patterns and systems of violence are not new at all. And other speakers have noted today the deep learning from our Latinx, African American, Hmong, and Somali communities to our local Minnesota homegrown human rights organizations like the Advocates for Human Rights, who've worked for decades on the rights of refugee and asylum communities, to the Center for Victims of Torture, which has been the world's leading survivor-centered center for trauma. We all come to this conversation with luggage. As UN Special Rapporteur before my current job, I learned very quickly that justice pushed from the outside, justice that doesn't speak to the communities that were harmed, justice that doesn't include them in its making and its delivery, is not the justice they wanted or needed. So that's really important that we keep this centered in those who've been harmed. The next point I'd make is that accountability and justice are slow. From Ukraine to Sudan to Iran to Afghanistan to Gaza to Syria, where I sit as a commissioner on the Commission of Inquiry, calls for justice are persistent. And unfortunately, getting there is really slow. This isn't to lessen our quest for justice. It just means we have to be prepared for the long road. And the long road gives us, even as we press to respond, even as we struggle with exhaustion and responding to the immediate crisis, it gives us time to plan the kind of justice and accountability that not only addresses the immediate grievances of summary and arbitrary execution, arbitrary detention, violations of family life, non-refoulement, enforced disappearances, and gender-based violence by the state, but is firmly focused on the root causes of accountability and addresses the systems of unaccountable power, increasingly practiced lawlessness and coercive violence. It's not enough to win court cases if we don't address the underlying political deficiencies that are producing the violence. And in the language of international human rights law, guarantees of non-repetition are essential. And that means institutional reform of military and policing institutions or transformation of those institutions, including dismantling, lustration, and vetting. These have to be part of our conversation. International law has a role to play and is doing that already under the supervision of the international community, the Human Rights Center, the advocates, CVT, and others in the state. We will continue to press, not just here in the US, but beyond in places like Geneva and New York, to highlight to other states and to international institutions that the breaches that the US is engaging in are not just breaches of domestic law, but breaches of sacred treaty obligations to which the US is a party. Let me conclude by saying that justice work is long, and what it has taught me over the years is that justice has to have a wide berth. It includes criminal responsibility, but criminal responsibility is only a necessary and not sufficient condition for transformation. We will need in the long run broad and deep truth-telling that is premised on inclusion and the embeddedness of our communities and individuals from across the state. Nothing about us without us. It has to be intersectional, inclusive, smart, and deep. It's about the violence on our street, but it's also about the truth of structural violence, the lack of education for kids, healthcare access, the right to access work, all of these things that are part of the Minnesota story. Truth-telling that only talks about the civil and political violations of the rights of Minnesotans is just missing half the story. Justice will have to include reparation, not just looking backwards, but looking forwards, fixing and rebuilding. Justice will also have to mean reconciliation. And here I'll close by saying, some of this means we have some really hard talking and rebuilding of relationships to do with those we politically disagree with. I come from Belfast, and I was part of a small group of people that helped forge a peace agreement in our country that ended decades of violence on the streets and in my community. But that required some hard things, like listening to those who disagreed with us, like sitting with those who'd done us harm. And in places like Syria, where I work now, I know firsthand the challenges of that, but I don't see a way to create a society built on law and on respect that doesn't require it and make us do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fionnuala. And why don't we just please a round of applause for remarkable presentations. So here's what we're going to do. We have, I think, Marissa is going to have a microphone running up and down, and so I will do my best to call on people when I see them. So if your hand has been up and I didn't call on you, I'm sorry. I'm just going to do my best. And then in about 15 or 20 minutes, shortly before we end, I'll get two or three of the questions that our moderator, Aidan, thinks may be most compelling, and I'll bring in questions from the online audience as well. But please, I see, Sky, you just shot your hand up, so please, Marissa, she's on the other stairway, so you got to go across. And Sky, why don't you ask your question? Oh, I'm sorry, we got two runners. That's terrific. Okay. And please address your question to one person, and that individual will respond. And then if others on the panel want to respond, they can weigh in as well. And keep your question very short, because we only have half an hour. Just ask.
Sorry, Eric, we need all questions on the microphone so the captioner can relay
Yeah, but the
it.
mic doesn't seem to be working.
You got to turn the mic on.
Oh, you got to.
Is this thing on?
Thank you,
Hello?
Isaac. Thank you, Isaac.
So my question for Carolina
I'll repeat the question, and then we'll work on the mic. Go ahead.
is, what advice do you have towards maintaining hope in times of adversity and in times of crisis? What advice do you have to keep your energy high?
Okay, the question is how to retain hope in times of adversity and crisis.
Thank you, Sky, for the question, and it's great to see you. I think the thing, and I'm sure people will have things to add, but not being alone. I think when you're trying to carry it and be alone and try and understand all of this, it's very difficult. Really, it's finding community. If it's neighbors, if it's people within your church, finding the people that are together and finding ways to get that anger, that frustration out in a way that is truly coming together to support the community. I think in the shortest way I can respond to that is really putting yourself in community, not taking it, or at least not trying to attempt to take it alone, because I think that's the piece that makes it a little bit dangerous with our mental health being and just our well-being overall.
Thank you, Carolina. That's a beautiful
If
answer.
if I might add,
Please.
yeah, I mean, also for the Somali community, especially, I didn't go to details of what's happening. A lot of bad things are also happening, but I was just the optimistic side. The sense of resilience, a lot of it is kind of relying on faith, in this kind of situation. So a lot of the time you see people saying, only what God will happen. This, whatever that's meant to happen will happen. But at the same time, with hardship comes ease. So always this will not be forever. And so that sense of just we've been through a lot, and this is another temporary thing because it's clearly, unjust and unfair. It doesn't have a real, foot to stand on. So based on that, this shall pass too.
This too shall pass. Thank you, Abdi Salam. Other questions? All right, I see one right there. Please, wait for your mic.
So my question is back,
To
Nicole.
whom? Okay, to
Nicole, you spoke earlier about the loss of revenue in the Twin Cities, which is going to have an immediate, impact and long-term. What I don't see, and I would like for anybody to address, is support from around the country, from progressives. I see no busloads of people from Wisconsin coming up here and staying in our hotels, eating in our restaurants, going to the theaters. Iowa, the people that elected this government are not here to help us. Where's Governor Newsom? And 100,000 Californians. Is anybody working on this issue to get us the support that we need? We can't do it on our own.
I'll just call him and, no, I'm just kidding. So, no, I completely agree with you that this has to be a national question, has to be for any political party, frankly, because I'm sure there's Republicans living in Minnesota. So, and they're going to also suffer from the revenue issue, the loss of revenue. When in my short time here, and I would love to stay to keep spending money here because I've had a really nice time. So I hope I can come back. It was my first time ever coming here. I have been asking state level and federal level, like, is there going to be a Recovery Act? Is there going to be something that, and this is, I mean, I've seen this in other crises where I've worked, but also this isn't my, people that I've interviewed here are saying, we had housing assistance during COVID. Why is nobody thinking about something like that right now? So the best thing that I can think of is to document, to demand that of your elected officials. I am going to be talking to the Chamber of Commerce president. I want to hear the data that might be having. We don't have it right now, perhaps, because it takes like a quarter to look back and say how much was lost. But that's something that I think needs to be captured and also put forth with a plan. And I think no better than the people who are losing the revenue to say, this is what I've lost and this is what I need to be compensated for.
Does another panelist have, Yael?
Yeah, and if I could just say, like, I think we have to make the case to the federal government that the spending that was done over the summer to cut basically everything except ICE and CBP's budget, that was a huge problem, okay? And we have to show the impact of that. The impact is that you over budgeted this enforcement apparatus and didn't pay for anything else that people actually need. And I think this will help make the case. It's actually doing damage, right? Just to rejigger our spending. Like we have to change the way the federal government spends money. And I think this would help make the case.
I mean, it's not unfathomable to think that $109 billion from the big bad bill and then the current smaller level of funding that's getting fought right now and is paused because they want to try to put reforms in, that money might not all be spent, particularly if everybody still stays on the street and keeps trying to protest against how it's being spent in this place and in other places. And then when it comes up for expiry, get our Congress people to rescind that money and put it into a recovery fund.
I want to, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Amelia, you had a comment?
I did. So I would actually say that some of these things are happening, but we're not seeing them because they're not exciting. They don't make good news. We have people and organizations who are advocating for an eviction moratorium right now. We have people who are organizing to try and get us to, call, do the boring work of calling your congresspeople and calling your representatives and showing up at the city council meeting and demanding of an eviction moratorium and demanding that the local governments are enforcing their separation ordinances. And so some of this work is happening, but as with any community organizing, we need more people. Right? We need you to show up. We need you to make those phone calls. It's boring and it doesn't make good social media fodder. And it's maybe some of the most important work that is going to be done.
Thank you. I just want to make two brief comments. First, I'm not sure that there wouldn't be a willingness. I mean, I'm spend a lot of my time in Washington, D.C., and when I engage with my friends there, there's an enormous amount of sympathy for what's happening here. But I think if people were asked, they would respond. But I think there's if that is a project, I think it may be a project that has to come from Minnesota. I mean, and the other point I want to make, which I think is also important, I don't want to suggest that nobody made structural, as Fanula did, and socioeconomic points in this discussion, which in the best sense of the word, are political points. So this discussion is not devoid of politics. But most of the panelists were not complaining about a conservative approach toward immigration. What they were talking about was a lawless approach to immigration. And the reason that's an important point is because I think it explains why there has been so much support on both sides of the political aisle in Minnesota, for, or so much opposition to the methods of the government. I think it's a very important point to make, because when you use terms like unlawful killing, arbitrary arrests, detention without cause, ignoring court orders, that's not liberal or conservative. That has to do with the rule of law. And I think, with due respect to the points that Fionnuala made, and I think some of them were structural points, as others made, that is, I think, what has caused this sense of outrage in the community. So, other questions? I think your hand was up, and then I'll get you next. Please. Yes. No, we're not allowed to do that. Otherwise, we'll hear from Isaac.
Can you hear me? Yes. Earlier today, as I was driving, I tuned into NPR, and I thought it was a historical documentary about occupied Warsaw during World War II. But instead, it was a story about refugee situation here in Minnesota, and you heard the details, so I don't have to repeat this. And I was deeply touched by it because I'm a former political refugee in this country. There are two challenges that I see before I ask the question. One of them is that, we don't hear from our leaders, political, economic leaders in this state, what they think about it, what they're going to do about this. I mean, the CEOs of Target, 3M, Cargill, where are these people? Where are political leaders who used to be former governors, former representatives? We don't see them. And then the other challenge is we are not united as a majority, right? Because I heard today, and just one quick story, that in Brainerd, just a couple days ago, the local sheriff turned in 4 people to ICE voluntarily. And my question is, what can we do now, not months from now, a year from now, to stop this persecution of refugees in our state?
I'm gonna ask. You didn't address to anyone, but I'm going to ask our Minnesota panelists to take the first stab at that question. So I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. So any one of them. The first question: why aren't our political leaders speaking out more forcefully?
I guess everyone's looking at me. I mean,
Just me.
I don't know them. I can't say what's in their brains, but I think, as with most things, it comes down to power and money. Like, they don't want to be on the wrong side of the federal government right now because of the lawlessness, because of what we're seeing and the tendency towards using our federal systems and our local systems to persecute, people who disagree with the current administration. I think, that's my guess. That's my guess.
I'm going to ask Fionnuala, I'm going to interpret your question. I'm going to ask Fionnuala to take this one on, because I think it speaks right to the points you were making. How do you navigate the tension between the importance of fundamental and structural change on the one hand, and on the other hand, the need, as you referenced Belfast, to engage those who, feel so differently than you about fundamental political issues? And it sort of is, your second question, which is the sheriff in Brainerd.
Well, I think I distinguish between two things, and I think the lawyers, including you, Eric, would say, the situation for federal and state law officials and in terms of cooperation and the obligations of cooperation are complex, and they're being navigated not just through individual incidents or handing us over, but also in the exploitation of both legal obligations, but also practices of cooperation over long periods of time that have been the mainstay. It's not that there isn't. There has historically been cooperation between federal and state officials around immigration enforcement. And that's not necessary. That happens in many, many countries of the world. In the world, it is not unique or unusual to the United States. The question, of course, is: are we seeing a radically different set of practices, which I think we are, which both strain the legal obligations in that space, and also a set of tensions between, as well set out in our Constitution, between states' rights under the 10th Amendment and federal government rights, including in the area of border enforcement. That's a complex set of questions. I'm not going to say, I think it is more than the feelings of any one individual. They're complex constitutional and legal questions that are working their way out in our courts. On the second question you ask, Eric, which I think is a really fundamental one, which is how, and it is a political question, and I actually don't think you don't bulldoze your way through this with the law. You don't fix this. You can do some things through law, but as we've learned, I think, particularly in the first and now the second Trump administration, law is a much thinner tool of protection than we thought it was. And the Constitution has proved to be much thinner than we thought it was in many respects, including through the interpretive scope given to it and some core protections. We'll see what the court does, for example, with Fourth Amendment protections, Supreme Court. So I think the point about this necessity of engagement with the other is central. And that doesn't mean everybody gets what they want. I think one of the lessons I would say from really fissured and in many ways damaged societies through violence, through oppression, through the misuse of force, is that actually it requires some really difficult compromises. Nobody gets precisely what they want when a polity is as divided. And I think the US is in that territory of deeply divided and fissured state. And that requires a kind of reaching out, which is really difficult to do when you have a boot on your neck, actually, but is also going to be required at some point. So the start of that conversation, it has always seemed to me that of many of the places in the United States, Minnesota is one of the best places to be able to start that conversation. Then some of it is starting it already. It's already, as you said, Eric, it's that group of people who may have different political views, but actually can't abide the fact that they see the Constitution being trampled on, and they're not. They're not defined by being Republican or Democrat in that way. They're defined by defining themselves by the rule of law. So that is a starting point.
Thank you for that. Sarah, do you have a follow-up for that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the question on, particularly some of the more rural areas of Minnesota. I'm sure a lot of people may have seen, as things were happening in the Twin Cities, sort of this contrast and others sort of saying, well, Minneapolis isn't Minnesota, and kind of creating those contrasts. But I do think there did start to be a point, and to your point, Eric, where law enforcement, even in rural areas, saw what was happening here in Minneapolis and saw and spoke up. There were, a number of different police chiefs in smaller towns that were speaking out because they were fearful for the children in the school and their own communities, and really embarrassed to be associated with, federal quote unquote law enforcement that was happening here. And so I think, to your point of seeing some of those spaces and calling out, and when it was going beyond. And I think the other thing that we'll start to see now too, as their purported drawdown of forces does not mean there's going to be a drawdown of federal enforcement here. It just won't be perhaps as much visible on the streets anymore. And so I think a lot of people are starting to look back into our counties and broader areas. Detention here in Minnesota, even though they're swiftly moving people from Fort Snelling to other states, but those are county contracts. And so that's another place to look and connect with other rural areas. And then also the 287G agreements that the counties are in. There is a process that has to go through, and there's as Amelia was saying, there's an opportunity for public engagement there. So really trying to connect with people that are in those areas and remind them of the violations that are happening and hopefully gain momentum. So it's not just an urban response to this, but really a Minnesota response as a unified state.
Can you, in a sentence, explain the 287 agreements to those who may not know?
Yeah, so the 287G agreements are essentially contracts between counties and the federal government. So sort of opposite from that separation ordinance where local law enforcement and cities are saying, federal government, you do your job, like they're contracting the counties to really be proactively cooperative and doing the enforcement work of the federal immigration service.
We have a couple of questions online. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'll ask one or two of these, and then we'll have time maybe for one or two others from the audience before we close. I'm going to ask this one to both Abdi Salam and Carolina. We were talking about we need more help from Minnesota needs more help from those outside of Minnesota, for those who don't live in Minnesota and they want to support immigrants' rights here, what can they do? And to the extent we're talking about money, what would the money go to?
I think that this is the part that it also brings me a lot of hope and a lot of, it just feels really good because part of what we have been doing within the Immigrant Defense Network, and keep in mind, this is only within the Immigrant Defense Network. There's also other networks, other organizations doing amazing work in Minnesota. But just within our group, we've trained over 30,000 constitutional observers throughout the state of Minnesota. Those are people that are going out there, that are supporting their communities, that are documenting what's happening. But we've also, within that network, put out a call to raise $1.5 million, where 100% of that goes to community members, to rent support, food, and we've been getting donations from all over the country, Canada as well, and other places that are sending money, knowing that 100% of that is going back to community. We raised that money. We're at the 1.5, and we continue to get donations, and every single week we're putting out anywhere from 100 to 150,000 directly into those communities, which is huge. And it really shows you how much support there is even outside of Minnesota. And also for us, for our network, is how do we hold ourselves accountable to our community members, acknowledging that that's not going to fix everything. If you divide 1.5 into the number of families that need support, it's not a lot. But how do we make sure that we are accountable, that we continue to push, and that we continue to provide a little bit of relief that will give them hope to continue going through this? And then finally, we have been getting a lot of requests from social media influencers, people from outside. We've told them, come to Minnesota. You will hear from the news that things are better, that 700 agents leaving will make things better. No, the number of agents here is still the largest number. And that's not, it's not going to be okay. So what we have been telling people is come, see for yourselves, be our eyes and ears, because we already have targets on our back, even though we're still going out every single day, but you have a lot more protection. You can put this at a national scale in a way that we can't. And that's actually, they've been accepting our invitations. They've been coming, documenting, and speaking up. And that feels really good to have people that are accepting and coming and knowing that they're putting themselves in a risky situation, but for a good reason, and to be able to speak up for the people that are not able to speak up.
Abdi Salam?
Sure. Yeah, for the Somali community, I think the biggest areas that the highest need, one of them is housing related, so rental support, because it seems many people have lost their jobs or are not going to work. And by losing their jobs, in one way that this has affected some of the programs that have been frozen because of the fraud situation, there are many people who are working that have now lost their jobs. So not necessarily the business owners, but a lot of workers and daycare staff and so on. So there's huge demand in that area. And the other one is the businesses. So people who have closed their businesses because of fear, like Carmel Mall, which is one of the biggest malls, has been empty at least the first month. Now things are kind of coming back relatively better. In terms of where the resources can go to, I'm not aware at this point something that's Somali specific. I can ask and maybe get back to you on that. But I think those two areas are kind of high need areas. the other support in terms of people standing up with the community, that's really strong. In my school, there are many volunteers who are standing out every day, dismissal time, recess time, and also at the mosques, people, kind of line up every Friday prayers just to make sure that people are safe. So the financial side, I don't have insight into that, so I can ask. Yep.
Thank you. By the way, we have a little bit of time. If any other panelists want to add, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. I have two more questions from the Zoom. I'm only going to offer one of them, but I think the first one was already answered, which is what can restitution making us whole look like? And I think we've learned that the answer to that question has got to come from community. It's not for necessarily for a panel, but if others disagree with that, you can put your hands up. But I think the question which may be very pertinent to this moment is, what exactly should we be asking elected officials to do? And I really think, I suspect this question was maybe focused at the state level, because I think there are lots of lobbying efforts at the federal level. But what should Minnesotans be demanding of, the governor, the attorney general, and state and local elected officials?
An eviction moratorium, so the families that cannot work and have lost their jobs are not also being evicted onto the streets.
Anyone else?
Funding for legal services?
It's interesting that both answers speak about what Minnesota officials have the plenary authority to do. It's interesting to me that nobody responded by talking about how to engage federal officials.
Well, I can say, Eric, you said that there is a lot of activity by national and regional immigration groups on specific things they're trying to get either fixed, thrown out, reined in on the DHS, the entire department. And still, with the loss of people's lives here, that list that's coming directly to Washington is not getting taken up in its complete form. So I think that there's a lot to still ask of the federal government about reining in something that clearly is a department gone wild. And so it's not, I don't want to take away from the crisis and everybody trying to respond here. And so would love, that was one of the reasons why Human Rights Watch wanted to come and hear directly from you, is that you all are in response. And what's the priorities? Is it these things that can be done at the state level? What else can be done? That are these lists of change in DHS right, wrong, inadequate? And how do we take the Minnesota message to others that can get it passed on through the federal level? Right. But the eviction notice, I want to ask you, frankly, why are they not doing it? What is the response? I didn't mean to imply that people weren't asking for it, but when I was asking officials, they were nodding their heads. But why are they not doing it? Do we know why?
I don't know.
Yeah,
somebody in the audience might know better than I do, but
because it was done during COVID, correct? Yeah. So it's even the best way to get a bureaucracy to do something is to show it when it did it before.
Well, thank you. And this, by the way, this whole session will be on YouTube, I guess in forever, or as long as things are on YouTube. I think we have run out of time. So first I want to, Carolina, Abdisalam, Yael, Sarah, Teresa, Nicole, Amelia, and Fanula. Fanula, because it's midnight there, I think. So I just can't tell you how grateful we all are to have had the benefit, and hold your applause, because we're going to do it in a second, to have the benefit of your wisdom. And I think we learned a lot. We learned a lot about how communities are being affected and what you're trying to do at the local level. We learned about Operation Paris. these legal efforts that are so important, the fact-finding, the work of organizations like Human Rights Watch, and the efforts of the community groups, and this question of how do we get to truth and reconciliation? And we were reminded that this is not going to happen in a week or two, and maybe even not by 28 or 2030. But that doesn't impact or affect the imperative of working today on what we can achieve. So now, please join me in a round of applause for this wonderful panel. And we will have other events like this. We will try to get federal government officials to come and talk to us as well, because that's what we do at this school and at this university. We're not always successful, but it's not for want of trying. And thank you all again for coming, and have a very safe trip back.